about it, on an average, each one of us makes a presentation for 5 to 7 minutes. Okay? And the perception is that you get an evaluation for 2 to 2.5 minutes, say 2.5 minutes. But that's actually not true, because the evaluator spends 2.5 minutes evaluating your speech. And then each member here takes another 1 minute. So on average, there are 20 members, that's 20 minutes of evaluation. So 20 and 22.5 is 22.5 minutes of evaluation. Plus, typically the person doing the evaluation sits with the speaker after the meeting on a little one-on-one and a little chit-chat to talk about the finer nuances of the speech and so on and so forth. It adds up to about 25, 26 minutes. That's a substantial amount of evaluation time that each one of us gets as an individual. I immigrated to Canada in '89, and I'd heard about this sandwich approach, sandwich technique, which we often talk about as Toastmasters, way before I heard about the sandwich technique way before I joined Toastmasters. And my first experience of this sandwich technique was when I went to meet my son who was studying in grade 4. I went to meet his teacher for a parent-teacher meeting. Okay. And so they said, you'll be waiting for 25 minutes. So the teacher said to me, both my wife and I were there, she said, "Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Krishna, you got such a wonderful child. He is a delight. I find him such a nice kid to have in class. He speaks so well, gets along with all his friends. In the area of computational skills, perhaps there is a little bit of an opportunity for him to polish off and round those serrated edges." I came home and was saying, what exactly was this teacher trying to tell us? And then we realized that was our first exposure to Canadian politeness. So now, when you talk about the sandwich technique, which Toastmasters talks about, what does it mean? It basically talks about, you talk about one good point, one bad point, and then a better point or a good point. So today, as part of my presentation, I'm going to focus on 2 aspects. One, I'm going to talk about the objective part of evaluations. I'm going to provide you with the framework. Second, I'm going to talk about the subjective part, which is the more difficult part of evaluation. It comes with the fear to evaluate, the little nuances, the subtleties, and how can you raise the bar in your evaluation. Now we talk about the sandwich technique as one model. There's another model, which I don't know if many of you have heard. It's called the Simon model. Has anybody heard of it? Not Simon Pang. Simon Cowell. Nobody's heard of it? Shh. You don't watch Idol?
Well, yeah, I know.
What does Simon Cowell do, or what did he do? What was he doing?
Straight up.
He made the participants weep. Did he? Isn't that what he did? Isn't that what he was doing most of the time?
Yeah.
So that's one end of the spectrum. And then you got the J-Lo model at the other end of the spectrum. And what does she do? The participants make her weep. So now, can you apply the Simon Cowell model to Toastmasters? So imagine you've got a brand new member making an icebreaker speech, okay? And you've got Simon Cowell to do the evaluation. What do you think is going to happen? The answer is obvious. But there's a difference, right, between singing and speaking. Because, okay, I'm not a good singer, you don't make it, it's fine. But when it comes to speeches, even if you're not a politician, you do need your speaking skills. skills, because you may be speaking at a wedding, or at a social function, or at a birthday, or at a company organization. So it's different. So the whole purpose here is to draw the speaker out. So in this first part of my presentation, where we're talking about the framework, it's very simple. You've got a manual which typically defines the objectives of the speech and gives you a list of things to look at. So if you take the competent competent communications manual, it talks about the icebreaker, it talks about vocal variety, it talks about using props, body language, gestures, speaking with sincerity, and so on. So for each one of them, you've got a set of objectives. But one easy way to do it, and which is a technique which I use, is I typically take a piece of paper and I divide it in a certain fashion. I take the opening part of the speech, the body of the speech, and the conclusion, if I'm evaluated. And I ask a few questions in terms of the opening. Did the speaker excite the audience? For example, did he or she come up with a provocative question? Did he challenge the audience? Did he talk about speech objective? Did he have a quote? How did he or she grab the attention of the audience? Okay. So if the person was using props, you can say, were the props effective? Or the PowerPoint slide, or the slides looking deep? How he or she start the presentation? The second part of the presentation is the body, which is the heart of the presentation, is the content. So you have the speech objectives, and you try and pick up 2 or 3 or 4 bullets to see if those 2 or 3 or 4 bullets captured the essence of what the speaker was supposed to be doing. And the third part of the speech is the conclusion. Good speeches are remembered typically by the opening and the conclusion. So you want to see whether the conclusion was effective. Was there a call to action? Was there, did he come up with a quote at the end? There's no formula. The person doesn't have to come up with a quote. Did he leave the audience with a take-home message? Say, wow, that made sense to me. I can relate to that speech. And then you remember that speech for a long time to come. Okay. Now, the speech has also to flow smoothly. It's not just opening, body, and conclusion. So there are intermediate transition sentences or phrases to move from one section of the speech to the second to the third. So that's a nice way for you to, that's a nice evaluation model or framework for you to have. Now we come to the second part of my presentation, which is outside of the framework, which is the subjective part of the evaluation. So in this issue of the Toastmaster magazine that I came across, I actually came across 2 articles. One of them talked about an Arab proverb, and the proverb reads like this. It says, "The words of the tongue should have 3 gatekeepers." So is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? So when you say, is it true? Are you being accurate and are you giving an honest analysis? That's the explanation. Is it necessary? Is it practical? And does it really help the person to improve? The third is it kind? Is it encouraging? And in our language, will the speaker come back and make the next speech? That's what it's all about. The same article that I was talking about gives another example of a particular member in Toastmasters going for a club event like an open house and makes a presentation. During the break, he got those little chits like we give, a little piece of paper with the evaluation. So he picked up one, he picked up the second, and he picked up the third. The first one said, "Your presentation was terrible." He said, "Your props were bad, we couldn't read the slides." The second one said, "You were not prepared." Okay. I was wasting my time. And the third one was from a lady who said, "The presentations at my Tupperware party are much better than the speech." So the member told the Toastmaster, "Look, I am quitting this club, I'm leaving." The Toastmaster said, "Wait a second." read the rest of the evaluations. And he read the rest of the evaluation, the other 18 of them, and he said, wow, they were good. So the member said, so the Toastmaster just gave him an encouraging pat on the back. He said, so don't give up so easily. He said, but still, I want to beat that lady who said that the Tupperware, what the hell does she do with those Tupperware parties that made those presentations better than my speech at the club? That was the net impact left. So this article talks about, it takes 11 positive comments to nullify one negative comment, and that is really a powerful one. So here you're left with this dilemma or a dichotomy. And if I were to come back to the Simon Cowell model versus the J. Lowe model, the two ends of the spectrum, the answer is somewhere in between. It's not one extreme or the other. You have to think of a solution in between. I said to myself, there are different speech situations. Okay. So for example, you've got the novice speaker, the brand new speaker, the icebreaker. Okay. So if you try the Simon Cowell approach, it's not going to work. Because you want this member to come back and you want to encourage the member. So the approach there is, it's a certain approach to the icebreaker or the first 2 to 3 speeches. Then you've got speakers like Francisco, who is off to the races. He's made 3 speeches in 3 weeks. You know. So I would put him in the category of, say, 5 to 8 speeches. It's a good idea for the evaluator to have a one-on-one with the speaker prior to the speech being delivered, and just get a sense of how much can you push this person, how much can you push the envelope, how much can you stretch, and what extent can you raise the bar? Will this person be willing to take on a little more critical approach? So you can try a different technique. The third is the what people call the experienced speaker, the evolved speakers, use any term you want, people who made 10+ speeches, and see whether they are in a mood for a jump in their speaking standards, and to what extent they can take on a much higher standard evaluation. So if I were to summarize this whole thing, there is a framework that I provided to you, and I've given you a set of nuances to consider when you're doing the evaluation, and use them to your best discretion.